the scene for this session. So high up in the cloud, I see this woman who's floating around in a hot air balloon, and then she gets lost. And then suddenly there's a break in the cloud, and then the woman. And then when she gets to the ground, she asks for directions.
Hello? Sorry, I'm lost and I can't find myself. Could you please help me?
Well, you are around 45 degrees, 25 minutes, 29 seconds north, and 75 degrees, 42 minutes, 20 seconds west. I'm standing at 100 meters above sea level, so you must be around 120 meters.
Wait, what? I see, I'm sorry, you must be a scientist. Thank you for the information, but you see, I've asked you a very simple question, and you've given me all this information, and I'm still lost.
Well, you must be a policymaker. You come out of nowhere with your question. I give you the most accurate and precise answer I can. You're still lost, and you blame me. So welcome. Right, I hope we are live now. It's 2:30 p.m. here in Córdoba. Welcome to our session entitled Supporting Policy with Scientific Evidence at the Annual Conference of the Marie Curie Alumni Association. Well, we've heard so much already this morning, but just to set again a reframe as a panel today. We live in a complex world with all sorts of different challenges and wicked problems, as Peter this morning said, that require an incredible wealth of scientific knowledge and expertise. 2 in 3 Europeans believe that scientists should engage more in policy making. But today we're going to learn a bit more about what are the necessary set of competences that we need for that. The story that we just heard, it seemed to us that captured quite well some of the most significant challenges around science policy. And today, to help us address those needs and challenges, and looking at the competences that are needed to improve this bilateral communication between scientists and decision makers, we have a very special guest, Lene Topp. Welcome, Lene. Lene works at the European Commission, precisely at the GRC, the Joint Research Center, where her work focuses on strengthening evidence-informed policymaking at the European Commission and beyond, particularly through training and other capacity-building actions for researchers. She's recently worked on a major project, Science for Policy, Competence Framework, of which we will hear more in a moment, which is a mapping of the essential competences, knowledge, skills, and attitudes that are required for researchers to increase the policy impact of the research results. Lene has also contributed to the development of classrooms, online and e-learning, training courses, etc.
Share the mic here, so there'll be a lot of exchange. Who's also now working out in industry, and he is part of the Marie Curie Alumni Association. Myself, I'm Stephany. I'm based in University of Helsinki in Finland, where I'm working in the research flagship for climate and air quality. So I'm a research coordinator there. So Lene, you'll be introducing this newly launched self-assessment tool that we'll learn about and the competencies for science for policy. But to get us started, we'll cover some basics and then we'll open the floor for all of you. And also those who are watching us online, you can also comment or send your questions and we'll be moderating them online here. So to start off, science for policy. You've been spending a lot of effort in building the framework, in doing the research to do the framework. We actually met you in Brussels because you were training us in science for policy. And then the EU itself, to be, to meet its strategy of being a green continent, of being a digital leader, all of this requires a policy that's informed in evidence. And that's quite a big role and responsibility for scientists, especially when we're just coming out of a lab or an academia, and that's not at all part of the conversations that we have there. So why do we need science to have a democratic, informed society? How does science get to that point?
Thank you, Stephany. Well, if you ask the European citizens, which the European Commission did in a EU survey last year, 2 out of 3 says that they would like to see scientists more involved in political debates. So it's basically the people have spoken that, okay, we want more science included in political decision making and policy making. That's the very, very short answer. A little bit longer answer would be, well, if we don't involve evidence, if we don't involve science, then it's just kind of the political will of the day that will decide. This is not to say that it's only science that will make the policymakers take their decision. In the Joint Research Center in the JSC, we make a very clear distinction between science-informed and science-based. And we always work with science-informed decision-making because we know there's lots of other things that goes into political decision-making. We're not rational human beings. So there's more to decision-making than evidence. There's political agendas, there's the needs, the values, and so on of the citizens. So it's not only the peer-reviewed articles that will serve as a basis for decision-making. And not that we will open that discussion today, but evidence is not only scientific evidence either, right? It's also lived experiences, it's opinions, and so on. It's expert input. It doesn't need to have been in a peer-reviewed article to be considered as evidence for policy making.
Thank you. And I suppose this session has the unique selling point, if you want, to delve more into what are those competences and how we can reflect on them and how we can really educate more ourselves. So in that line of thought, Lene would now present something about the competence framework, because we all belong to a generation that has not really been taught at university about how to acquire those skills. Now the JRC has come up with something which we call the competence framework. And yeah, Lene, what is the competence framework?
The competence framework, it is not working, but maybe let me go over to the, oh, it is, yeah, good. Good. The competence framework is something that we developed at the JSC over the last few years. It's very important to say that it was developed for the JSC, by the JSC, but not for the JSC. So it's for any researcher, any organization working in this interface between science and policy. So for any researcher or research organization who are looking to increase the policy impact of their work. And we realized in the JSC, so the JSC is part of the European Commission. We are supposedly very close to policymakers, but we had real troubles getting our evidence picked up by the policymakers. Even though we were so close, we were inside. We should be able to just call them up, get a meeting, explain, and then it's part of the policy making. That was not the real world for us. So we said, okay, something is missing here. And we realized that you actually need this distinct set of science for policy competences. So something in additional, something complementary to what we are being taught as scientists at university. And therefore we started then to look into what does this look like? What are the additional competences that we need in order to better collaborate, better communicate with policymakers, with a non-scientific audience, basically. And we then looked at it, we looked at literature, we talked to experts and so on, and then we came up with this competence framework that you see up here, and that I will get into in a little while. What we also realized and why we continued working on it was that basically at no university, nowhere do you actually get training or coaching or mentoring on these competences. It's just something that wasn't really on the agenda. And that's why we spent a good part of the last 3 years on researching on this, reviewing it, and then developing it to something that we have now published and that is now open for anybody to inside and outside the European Commission to work on. So let me just go on to this one here. So you see a word in bold, collective. It's extremely important, and I will say it many times because each time we present this, we get the question, so there's 27 competences here. How am I going to be able to do all this on top of my other work? Well, it's not you, it's the organization. So nobody can be good or even know about all these 27 complementary competences. It's something that we, as the JSC, can cover collectively, or at a university, in a department, or in a boundary-spanning organization, you can cover it collectively. And then as an individual, you pick a few that you want to excel in. But it's not something that you as an individual can do. One of our other mantras is that policy impact is a team sport, right? It's not something that you do by yourself. And this is part of that mantra. This is all that you need to get into policy impact, but it's a collective exercise because nobody can do it by themselves. If we then look at the competence framework, it has 5 clusters, the A, B, C, D, and E. The first one is understanding policy. So knowing a little bit about who is it that takes the decisions, who is it actually that I should look to get some impact. Is it at local level, regional, national, supranational level? What reading are they in at the parliament? A little bit like that. So you understand a little bit the institutions and the actors so that you know when to act, and when it's too late, when it's too early. The cluster B is to participate in policy making. So that's really when it's going in, being part of proposing policy options, writing policy briefs, and so on. The cluster C, the green one, is the communication. It was too long a title to say communication with a non-scientific audience, but that's what it should say. So it's not the peer-reviewed articles. It's not you communicating with scientists in your own discipline. It's communicating with a non-scientific audience, whether it's policymakers or politicians. Very important. And here we have speaking with impact, clear writing. There's also something that we call a communication mindset, because a competence consists of knowledge, skills, and attitude. The knowledge is something that you know, the skills is something that you can do, and the mindset, the attitude is that, okay, as a scientist, I accept that part of my time will be spent on doing policy impact work. It's all very good that you're good at writing policy briefs and so on, but if you don't prioritize it, then it doesn't really matter. If your mindset, if your attitude is not to spend the time on it, then it's all good that you know how to do it and you have the knowledge, but if you don't do it, then we will see no change. So that's why the mindset competences are in there, both in the communication and in the next cluster on engaging with citizens and stakeholders, and also in the last cluster on collaboration. So very important to keep in mind that this knowledge, skills, and attitudes in the competences, and that it's a collective set of competences. You may pick a few that you want to look into, or you may say, I want to be a generalist, so I'll pick maybe 7 or 8. No, I want to be a specialist, and in citizen engagement, I just want to be the top-notch expert in my country on this. That can also be an option. But just to have as a goal to be an expert in 27 things on top of your other tasks is not at all realistic, just to not scare anybody away. So.
Thank you, Lene. That's very, very insightful. And early on during lunchtime, you drew a very important parallel between self-assessment on one hand. I mean, this can also be a tool for self-assessment, but it's rather on self-reflection. So that should help scientists, researchers to reflect on what the skills we already have, the level of competence, and maybe improve on some of them. Perhaps I got a follow-up question on that. Is there anything on the pipeline to self-assess or self-reflect on the policymakers, let's say on the other side of the pond?
Yes, and thank you for bringing it up, because in parallel, with developing this competence framework for researchers, we also developed one for policymakers. Because it takes two to tango, right? It's not fair that only researchers should upskill, policymakers also need to upskill. Some of the competences are the same. So the competences the clusters C, D, and E, communication, citizen and stakeholder engagement and collaboration, they are common. So they are exactly the same between policymakers and scientists. And this is also to kind of show we're not that different, although sometimes we pretend we live in two different worlds, but we actually have lots of things in common. Of course, there are differences as well. And one of the clusters in the policymaker competence framework is working with evidence. So this is basically the parallel to this one. Say, okay, we as scientists needs to become a little bit, how to say, well, let's just be frank, a little bit better at collaborating and communicating with policymakers. Likewise, policymakers need to become a little bit better at procuring, asking for evidence, and understanding a little bit the world of scientists. So there are indeed these two competence frameworks that goes hand in hand.
Thank you. And just to contextualize that a bit more, as we are at the annual conference of the Marie Curie Alumni Association, a recent document by the European Commission, the staff working document, has emphasized the need for boundary organizations to get more involved in the science for policy interface. What do you think is the specific role of an organization in this space?
I would say listen to the recent Sapir podcast about knowledge brokering organizations. What they were saying, I'm sorry, I've forgotten their names. Two researchers from a Wales research institute or organization, something, and they were saying basically that the boundary organizations, they spend a lot of time synthesizing evidence, synthesizing what is out there, and less time on doing research themselves. They spend a lot of time doing synthesis. They spend a lot of time translating evidence into something that is accessible and useful for policymakers. And maybe I can just jump to the next one here, because I wanted also to mention to you this Smart for Policy self-reflection tool that we have that we've just come out with, because this basically helps policymakers and researchers to try and figure out what are the competences that I have right now, and what do I need to do to become better. So it's a tool where basically we have the competence framework, and you go in either as a researcher or as a policymaker, and you reflect on your level of competence against each of the competences, or some of them. You don't need to do all of them. And then you get tips on, okay, if I would like to get better at citizen engagement and I'm right now at the level beginner, there will be some tips and some resources, online resources on how do you get on to the next level. And as Nino said before, it's very important to say that it's not a performance assessment. So it's not for you that you get a 4.8 grade in citizen engagement. It's really for you to reflect on how you can get better. So it's not to assess, it's to reflect. So it's a way kind of to help researchers and policymakers to get better at working with evidence in a co-production kind of way.
So now I had a question. So you might think, you might evaluate yourself and work on being a very good communicator or being a team player and wanting to discuss with policymakers. But now, when I think of the data and the knowledge that we can offer, we have, at least thinking from University of Helsinki, we have a lot of open data. It has to be open. We might have willing researchers that want to help in climate-related science. But now, this is science for policy and policy for science. But science is not one type of species. What I'm referring to is that I think we even have a problem when we're talking amongst scientists. So if we really want to address these wicked problems that Nino referred to in the beginning, it's not only about being good communicators with policymakers, but starting to be good communicators among scientists themselves. So as a policymaker, they might require some sort of synthesized information, which these knowledge brokers or organizations can help. But then are they getting bits and do they have to then make the cake with the flour and the egg and the sugar? Or do we work first as scientists to be good communicators ourselves so that we can present something more tangible to those policymakers? So in terms of having data and knowledge access for policy, so what do you think about the step before that within the scientific community?
I think that we as scientists, the incentives that we have right now is rather to do a new study than to synthesize. So, but that's not, if you look at it from the policymaker's point of view, their dream scenario is to get a synthesis of evidence, a cross-disciplinary synthesis of evidence. Because if they, a little bit what we saw in some countries for COVID, right, where you bring in lots of different experts, psychologists, epidemiologists, economists, what have you. You bring them in and then they come up with one synthesis of evidence. Because on the basis of that, and then at the end of that synthesis, you have options. Say, okay, if you if you give priority to the economy, then we keep the schools open so the parents can go to work. If we give priority to zero new infections, then we keep the schools closed and everybody works from home. So these are different options. The evidence, there's no right or wrong answer from a scientific point of view because it's different. It's a political choice. It's a value choice. Do we value economy highest or do we value health highest? The evidence cannot take that decision. It's a political decision. And this is why when I started out, I said that there's more to decision making than evidence, than scientific evidence, because it's not a rational decision. There's more to it. There's all the political and values that comes into what will the politicians say in the end. So to come back to your questions, what can scientists do? Well, scientists can, rather than sending a synthesis from their own discipline, they can send or submit or develop a synthesis, a cross-disciplinary synthesis. They can ask themselves, would the policymaker really need a new study, or would they be much better off with a synthesis of what is already out there? Maybe a new study will just make what we know, maybe they will just add another 2% to the knowledge that we already have, we as scientists, but maybe the policymakers don't have that knowledge because it's behind paywalls or what have you. It's in a peer-reviewed article that they haven't had the time to read and maybe didn't know existed. So we can definitely think twice before we do another study and think about, would it not maybe be better to do a synthesis of what is already out there? And then when we do synthesis, it's extremely important that we take the policy question, the wicked problem, as the starting point for our synthesis and not the research question, right? It's the policy question that is the center of the synthesis of the evidence. It's not the research question. Very important that we remember that the starting point is the policy question.
I'm sure this has already stimulated a lot of questions. So maybe we can open to the floor. And we have we're really lucky to have Lene here. She's a treasure of expertise in this area. So don't be shy. Also, I'd like to encourage those online. I'm following here on the platform, so I can read out those questions that you post on the chat.
Is there anybody having a question? Otherwise, I'll keep asking. Okay, we have plenty of them. So, I'm going to have to bring you the mic.
Thank you. Just wanted to note, I mean, you mentioned policy is different from the science and different field, but I feel like you cannot, for example, in the example you brought up, you cannot separate economy from health, from education. They are all interconnected to each other. So if, for example, healthcare collapses, it will feed back the economy. If the kids get sick in the education, then parents have to stay home. So I mean, it seems to me that the connection between all these scientific fields are very important to help the policymaker. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh, can we take maybe 2 questions and then I can, would that be okay? I don't have a question. Sorry. Another question? Yeah.
Thank you very much for the nice insights. My question is there any and should there be any connection representation that sits between the scientific community and the policymakers? Because there are great scientists who are not good in communication. It's hard for them to conduct their message with the audience and the policymakers. And policymakers need the feedbacks of the scientists. And I think with the development of the technology, the communication should be very quick and smooth nowadays. So is there any institution, and should there be any institution that's in between?
Okay, so those 2 questions for now. And
All right. To your questions, definitely they are interconnected. But the policymakers have to make a choice. And this is what they did during COVID also. What do they focus on? And there's no wrong or right choices. It's just a choice that you have to make. It's like with any policy that you make, if we take immigration policy, it's the same, right? You have to make a choice. It's a political choice that you make. They are all interconnected, but there are political, the political parties represent different views of the world, and then they will make different choices. They have the same evidence. It's just that they decide that some evidence, based on their political convictions, they decide that some evidence is more important than other. So they are definitely all interconnected, and whatever decision you make, it will have a consequence for the other parts of the disciplines as well. Yeah. To your question about whether there should be somebody in between or an organization, it's a great question, and different countries have gone about it in different ways. You have some countries where you have organization and it's one person that is the science advisor, and then that one person then has his or her network of scientists that they then use, and then it's the science advisor, that one person, that then communicates and interacts with the policymakers. The advantage of that way of doing it is that you have a very kind of close relationship between the science advisor, that one person, and the policymakers or the politicians, and you build up this very valuable trust relationship. The disadvantage, of course, is that it's not the expert that speaks, right? The other systems that you have is that you have a broader organization where you have several people or several departments involved, and then each time it's the expert that speaks on behalf of the scientific community. and then it's a new person, so maybe it lacks that trust that you have on the other, but you have then the expert on the subject matter, and you could maybe say that the conversations in terms of answering questions might flow more easily. So there are pros and cons for the different systems. I think it's also important to say that it's not that all scientists needs to become policy communicators. That's important. Some will, and they would like to do it. Others will not. What I always argue for is that even if we're not a scientist, is not the one communicating, like doing the actual communication with the policymakers, we should keep in mind to have our science relevant for the policymakers. So we should still understand a little bit about policymaking so we can have the evidence ready when they need it. It's like if you start a 2-year research project, and then maybe just have a look at the political agenda and have a look at when might they need some data, and maybe you can reorganize your planning a little bit. Or maybe you can say, okay, we will have some preliminary data available. But it's just, we should try to be a little bit more conscious about what's going on in the policy world. Of course, still keeping our independence. It's more about being aware so that we can make it relevant and make it timely whenever it's possible, which is not always.
Were there more questions? Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much. So I have a question. Suppose that there is a scientific topic for which you need evidence, then who would select the experts for that specific topic, and how? In the sense that even among scientists, given a specific issue, scientists have sometimes the ability also not to get along with each other, or anyway to focus on small differences rather than perhaps giving also an overview of their similarities. So how is that choice made? Thanks.
Lene, would you like 2 questions or 1?
My memory fails. So yeah, and then we'll come with the mic. Sorry. Yeah, how do you select the experts? So I don't know. It depends from case to case how the experts are selected. But it's a very good question, because of course already when you select the experts, you're making a choice. Who do you involve? Who do you not involve? We saw it, sorry for going back to COVID, we saw it in the beginning of COVID that not all disciplines were involved. And so it is important to consider who gets selected, and also why they get selected. And this comes back to your question, this Sapir podcast that I was just mentioned and I listened to on my way down here. They were basically saying, do you select the experts that are the most prominent experts in terms of the evidence, or do you select the ones that are best communicators in front of the policymakers? Which ones do you select? It's a choice that you have to make, and a conscious choice that you have to make. I think also, and a little bit of self-promotion of the competence framework, one of the competences in the framework is also on communities of practice. So basically that you as a scientist, you become a convener and a facilitator of conversations across disciplines. Because as we said, it's a team sport. So it's not much used if all the economists come up with some options, and then the psychologist comes up with an options, and then the doctors come up with an option. It's not very helpful for the policymakers. So it's really also a skill that you are able, and as you say, not to be picky on just putting forward your own evidence, but you can also listen to the other disciplines and actively listen to and actually take it in and help to then formulate options that are cross-disciplinary and not only focused on your own discipline or your own evidence.
Just to encourage people also online to ask questions if they want to.
I'm going to run over there.
Hello, thank you very much. I wonder when this communication, what happens when this communication fails miserably, in the sense that policymakers just ignore scientists. I mean, I guess we all think in the same topic, climate change, right? We are, well, we know, I know that climate change, but scientists give strong evidence that this is happening over the years, and it will happen if, you know, the global warming goes above 1.5 or 2 degrees over the next few years, we are in a bad position. And recently there was the World Summit of Climate Change or something, and what happened? Nothing, like nothing at all. I mean, I would like to know your thoughts. When scientists are ignored, how that encourage more scientists to talk to, you know, to policymakers?
Galloping across the stage.
So basically, yeah, what do we do when the evidence that we have is being ignored? And climate change is definitely a good example of that. I saw some statistics. It's from the US, where basically 95% or maybe even more now of researchers agree that climate change is man-made, or is because of, and when you ask the population, they actually think it's 50-50. So that shows you how misinformation is going into society, that despite basically all researchers agreeing that it's, you know, it's human made, then the population in the US is 50-50 on whether this is just something that is happening or it's something that we can do something about. It's, I think when you communicate, you both communicate in terms of knowledge, but also in terms of connection. So how, because if you're not being listened to, it's that you haven't managed to connect with the person in front of you. So you haven't figured out basically what keeps them up at night. Apparently it is not that the temperature is rising for policymakers. Apparently that's not what keeps them up at night, because then they would have reacted. So we need to figure out what is it that would make them react. And we haven't figured it out, it seems, because not much is happening. And another good example is this Netflix movie, Don't Look Up, that came out like a year ago or so, where this huge meteor hitting the US, and it's an excellent movie in terms of science advice. It really hits a lot of examples of what is actually going on. So for me, it was very good fun to watch it and just try to draw parallels to the world, the everyday work.
I suppose on that note, then we got a question there. I mean, it would be interesting also to explore, you know, the difference in between providing, you know, sound science to policymakers, but also to understand that scientists at the end of the day are also honest brokers, people who should, you know, inform and help the decision-making process. But the decision-making process is not just based on the science. At the European Commission, you draw this important distinction between science-based and science-informed. I wonder whether you'd like to expand a bit on that one. Taking turns. Start with that, yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm going to be a bit cheeky here, but I don't think you fully answered his question. So when you are going to, there's evidence, climate change, clear evidence, and yet the governments are not doing enough, or they're not doing it all. So I think we also, as, let's say, scientists and evidence makers and evidence analyzers, we need to be also not naive, that we do have, and especially with things like climate change, these are very complex issues, and they are politically very charged and economically very charged. And so I have some feedback here, but I'm going to do it like this. So I think one needs to be aware that there are certain dynamics that science will not overcome, and it's going to be a little harder. So you have to keep on pressing. I think it's a question of also at the level of the scientists to not be naive and think political processes are complex and we have to keep on trying, and we have to keep on passing the evidence and keep on talking. So I just wanted to bring that to the point.
Would you like to comment on that? Or there was another question this side, yeah.
Hi everybody, Zascon Lacunza. It was just a comment very much aligned with what my previous colleague said. I just wanted to say that sometimes I feel that the research community, we are a little bit dramatic with how we express our disappointment with policy making. Nobody's doing anything, they are not listening to us, and sometimes it is that we are not aware of how much work is going on behind the scenes. I mean, of course, we all want much more to be done in terms of climate change, but there's a lot going on, you know, because I have the feeling that sometimes we have this very, very negative approach towards policy making, that it's not exactly fair, neither scientific in the terms of how we analyze the policy making. So it's just a note of optimism. The policymakers are human beings. They care about climate change, but things are very complicated, and that need to be acknowledged. And I mean, it's not as easy as stopping the world. I mean, we need to find a way to do things smoothly. So just that. Sometimes I feel that we are a little bit negative towards the policymakers.
Very important.
Yeah, so perhaps I'll make a comment that follows this. As a scientist, but so scientists are, I think, in many cases happy to provide evidence or to help, and I think perhaps, yes, they're not aware of the complications that may be behind the final choice, but isn't that also the duty of the person who is asking for help and for evidence to be more transparent on which are the different needs, which are the different expectations, and in communicating also which are the limits of this transparency and of the different choices that are behind that decision. I mean, even just from a management point of view, it is in the interests of the policymakers to make it clear why that situation is complex, why that decision is complex, rather than just saying you don't understand because you only have a limited view. Tell me what's the overview, and then maybe I'll be more empathic also to understanding that it's not just science, but there's many other aspects that I should consider.
Very good point. More questions? Gosh, lots.
Thanks. You gave me another clue, and sorry again. Empathy is also one of the competences in the competence framework in both of them, because we need to show more empathy towards each other. And I think also we need to get away from team researchers and team policymakers. We are a common team, because otherwise we cannot achieve evidence-informed policymaking. So we need to build up these trust relationships while we as researchers still keep our integrity. But I think just speaking from our own experience from the JSC, we realized that if we stay too far away from the policymakers to be absolutely sure to keep our integrity, then we weren't relevant because we didn't know what was going on. We do need to have some kind of interaction with the policymakers to know when it's relevant and what is relevant to provide. And the same with the policymakers. They need to know what is going on in research to know when to ask and what to ask. So it's important that we create forums or whatever possibilities to co-create, to communicate, to collaborate, while we still, of course, have our main function as a researcher or as a policymaker, but that we build the bridge and that we get away from Team A against Team B. We are all on the same team. We want to achieve evidence-informed policymaking. How do we get there from where we are now? I think that's important that we try to move again away from the us and them approach.
I'd like to add on to that, because that sense of trust to me sounds like a key cornerstone, really, because otherwise when you communicate uncertainty, it is interpreted on the other side as weakness. You're confused. Whereas if there is the relationship, people are more willing to engage more, and understand your position as well. There were more questions, I think. Yeah. Good.
I wanted to bring an example that I think is very relevant to this discussion. Since some time ago, I was contributing to an evidence review and synthesis about the toxicity of bisphenol A. It's a plastic component very used in the food chain for the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA. So I think in this case, this is a good example of this intermediate institution between the science and the policymakers. So after all the scientists conducted this evidence synthesis, the experts from EFSA are reviewing the synthesis and are issuing some recommendations. The problem here is that then member states can decide what to do with these recommendations. So the EFSA is going to say that the exposure levels of bisphenol A should be decreased because there are enough evidence to say that it's toxic for humans. But then in the end is the states who decide what to do, if they are going to adopt these recommendations or not. So my reflection here is how can scientists or science diplomacy, since we are speaking here about science diplomacy, help foster the adoption of these recommendations? Because I think in the end is the decision of countries.
I think this is bringing us a little bit back to the conversation that decision making is not rational. That there's more to decision making than evidence and than science. Often, when we do training on science for policy, we have a simulation exercise, a role play. And there's a minister, and the minister has a science advisor, and the minister has a political advisor. And those two do not always agree. Right, so the science advisor will bring forward their recommendation based on the evidence, and then the political advisor will bring forward the recommendations based on we are now in a minority government here, so if we just bring forward this, it will never go through parliament, for example, or there are elections in 6 weeks. You're not going to be re-elected if you're going to raise the pension age with 5 years. So there are more to decision making than the recommendations based on the evidence synthesis review, and that's just how it is. And then we need to figure out. We need to find a way to accept that. It's not to say that we shouldn't bring evidence, because we still want evidence-informed policymaking, but not evidence-based, because we know that there's more to decision-making than the evidence.
I just wanted to add a comment that something that was said in a previous session was that sometimes scientists are too nice. So just from a personal point of view, I would say that we also have to be a bit more active. And I think if we know that this is toxic and you're affecting my life and our fellow citizens, and I am aware of that, then I want to stand up and say I can't stand by and let this regulation affect all of us. So that's also my my contribution. Yeah, there were more questions.
Well, I think first of all, thanks for this introduction. I think this discussion is very, very useful for everyone to get different side of the problem and different views of everyone. But I want to bring the attention back to Marie Curie action and the scheme. I'm doing a PhD in energy engineering, specifically markets commercialization of energy technologies. So it's a field which is very affected by policies, right? Basically, the policy can dictate which technology goes into the market. So I want to ask you, you said, well, make it relevant, make it timely. We are more or less timely, we know it. That relevant part is very hard to get. So practically, like in terms of ESR's work or PI work, grant agreement proposal or deliverable design, what can be actually practically done for Marie Curie projects to be more impactful on policy?
Thank you. And we have 3 minutes, so I think this is maybe the last question.
3 minutes, then I'll be very short. So to make it relevant, look at what is already on the political agenda. Because the political agenda is full. So to get something new on is very difficult. So you need to somehow be able to link your technology, your work, to a subject, a point that is already on the agenda. If you come and say, hey, I have this new technology, it's fantastic, you should really also have a look at this. Many policymakers will say, have you looked at the pile of papers I have on my table? I have no time for anything new. So you need to link it to something that is already on. And the European Commission have multi-annual work programs. You can see what's on. I imagine in many member states it's the same, that you can see what's on the agenda. And the policymakers will thank you for coming to help them with fulfilling something that's on the agenda. Whereas if you put something new on the agenda, it's a really hard sell. I'm not saying you can't do it, but it's a much harder sell.
Would you like to once again maybe advertise the self-assessment tool and perhaps how that could help us now with the new reform for research assessment, how those type of skills will be more valued in the near future?
I would say, as I said, the self-reflection tool, even if you say, for me, working with policy is not my thing, fair enough. But just go in and have a look, just reflect on it, and see, is there anything in here that maybe I wanted to have a look at it. If on the other hand, you're in an organization where we say you have your whatever above you hierarchy saying, I don't understand, we don't get any impact, any pickup of our research, I don't understand, it gets so many citations and so on, what's going on? Then maybe bring this to them and say, hey, we need some complementary competences in order to get there. And this is what we need. And do we have this in-house, or is it something that we need to hire new people, create new job profiles? And maybe, so this is the first version of the self-reflection tool that is out. In April, we're going to come out with a new version where there's a group feature. So basically, you as a user, you can go in and define your group, your department, or your at university or at your institute, and say, we would like to assess or reflect on the collective set of competences of our department, of our unit, and then we see what we have and what we might be missing in order to achieve the policy impact. But when you do it, don't forget, it's not for you to do everything by yourself. It's a team sport. There's 27 competences. You can be good at a few of them. The rest is for your colleagues.
So perhaps we could already invite Lene to come around for the next conference to give her like a feedback on how we, played around with the tool. And thank you again for being with us today, and enjoy your break.
Marie Rietman. I'm a project manager at the Princess Maxima Center for Pediatric Oncology. And in this center we have a new co-funded project called the Maxima Butterfly Project. And it's a project where we recruit actually 28 PhD students or doctoral candidates in a pediatric oncology network. So let me first tell you something about the Princess Maxima Center. So the mission of the center is to cure every child from cancer with optimal quality of life. So all children in the Netherlands who are diagnosed with cancer will come to this center. And in the center they will be treated. And the other part of the center is totally dedicated to pediatric oncology research. Our center is fairly young, so we started in 2018. And at this moment we have almost 500 researchers really dedicated to pediatric oncology. Something special about the center is that all children in the Netherlands will come to our center, and they are also followed for their entire lives. And also all patients are asked to ask for permission to store all the leftover material for diagnosis to donate for the research purposes. So we have a very large biobank. And the name giver of our center is our queen, so Queen Maxima, so you can see her in the middle picture. So something about the butterfly program, as I already said, we will recruit 28 PhD students, and they will have projects in the entire range of our research, so from really fundamental research projects all the way to translational, clinical, and psychosocial projects. The duration will be 4 years, and we have like all the rules we have to adhere to, like the mobility rule. So in the Maxima Butterfly program, one of the key elements is that we have like a really transparent and unbiased selection of the candidates. So everything is anonymized in the first few stages, and we have also a lot of external independent reviewers. The training of the PhD students is very extensive. So we have, including of their normal research tasks, they also have to follow summer and winter schools where they are taught transferable skills, like IP, but also patent things and their personal development. And also they have to do internships, both in academic as well as in non-academic institutes. So with that, I would like to thank you. And if you want to see more information about our program, please scan the QR code. Thank you.
Thanks, and Mahi, for the talk, and very interesting project, perfectly on time talk. Yeah. And now I would like to invite Daniel to give his talk. Let's change. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Hi everyone, and thank you very much for being here. Today I'm going to talk about morphogenesis, which is how cells change their shape in order to build different tissues, as can be seen in this image here on the left. In particular, in my lab we are interested in studying how tissues interact one with the other during development, and for this we use the respiratory system as a model system. This is in flies. So the respiratory system has to interact with different tissues during development, and hence this is very useful to understand tissue interaction during development. And what you can see here is how the respiratory branches have to move around the animal during embryogenesis. And as you can see with these stripes of cells, these stripes in cyan are the epidermis. And so these two tissues are remodeled at the same time in development, but how these interactions are coordinated hasn't really been addressed. So in the lab we are trying to understand how this is achieved by looking at adhesion complexes. Our working model is that there's adhesion between the two tissues and that this adhesion is important to mediate the interaction between two tissues. So what you see here, it's a transversal section throughout an embryo where we can see this is not working, here, where you can see there are adhesion complexes in the epidermis that are very close to places throughout the tracheal system of the animal. And we think that these are places that are mediating the anchoring of both tissues and coordinating their development. We can also look at this by using electron microscopy, where we can see that the two tissues are actually in contact. So we have very close interactions between the two of them. And we think that this interaction would be then important to mediate the development of both tissues. So I already showed you this movie here on the left, where we see how what happens when we just look at normal embryos, and we see how the
will be 10 million of death due to this antibiotic resistance. And this will be compared to the cancers that are caused nowadays. So what can we do at that scenario? There are not too many new options of antibiotics. So people in the clinics try to use like a last resort antibiotics, for example, colistin, that were not so useful because it had a some additional adverse effects, okay? But if you don't have any other option, you try it wherever you have. So you can guess what happened after a while when the clinician start to use colistin. The bacteria, who are very clever, already develop a way to avoid this new antibiotic. And this is due to this enzyme, so it's abbreviated MCR. It's a protein membrane enzyme. And in our work, in our group, we are trying to understand how this enzyme is working, so we can have a new way to avoid the action of this enzyme and try to find a new solution to the antibiotic resistant problem. Thank you.
It's a PDF?
No, it's a
PowerPoint. Okay. Do you want to present from here? Okay. So now we invite Shreya Aib for her presentation. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Shreya Ayub. I'm currently an MSCA IF postdoctoral fellow at the Max Planck Institute of Multidisciplinary Sciences in Göttingen. And I work on this fascinating antiviral innate immunity protein called shiftless. So before I go into that, let me tell you about translation, which is the process of making proteins from mRNAs. And this is accomplished by the cellular machine called the ribosome. And usually during the process of translation, the ribosome needs to go in the forward direction. However, sometimes in the cases of things like viral translation, for instance, the ribosome might need to go backward by 1 or 2 nucleotides, and this process is called -1 programmed ribosomal frame shifting. The way shiftless works is by inhibiting -1 PRF, especially for viruses such as HIV and JEV, which depend on this to form their viral proteins. As part of my previous work and publication, which I presented in this forum last year, I showed that shiftless exists in a multimeric state, and multimerization is essential for the function of shiftless, and we also identified the residues of shiftless involved in multimerization. However, we still don't know how shiftless exactly affects HIV infection, and that is what I have addressed in this work. So for this, we first did cross-linking mass spectrometry to study interacting partners of shiftless. We found 2 groups. The first was ribosomal proteins, which we expected because we know that shiftless binds to the ribosome. But the second group was more interesting, which was stress granule proteins. And basically upon stress, such as viral infection, global translation comes to a halt, and mRNAs bound to the translational machinery coalesce to form stress granules. And stress granules serve as a decision point for translation, whether to carry on, stop, or decay the mRNA. And while we were looking at this, we found this publication which showed that shiftless is found in stress granules during herpes virus infections. lending further credence to our data. We also purified shiftless in both its monomeric and multimeric forms and did translation assays. And we were very interested to find that shiftless causes a generalized decrease in translation, even on mRNAs that don't have frame shifting elements. We saw that both monomeric and multimeric shiftless were similarly capable of -1 PRF inhibition, and multimerization on mRNAs therefore might be sufficient for shiftless action. And on the basis of this data and other data that I couldn't present yet, we proposed a putative mechanism of action of shiftless against HIV, which is on HIV infection. There is interferon induction of shiftless. Shiftless binds mRNAs non-specifically, which I've shown in my previous publication. This leads to a global decrease in translation, leading to shiftless recruiting stress granule proteins to frame shifting or viral mRNAs. Shiftless causes translation termination, which has been shown previously, and possibly GAG-POL mRNA decay, which we are in the process of showing. And thereby, shiftless would inhibit HIV infection. And if you have any more questions, you can visit me at my poster, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Then we will have Tung Atrio. Yeah, I pronounce correctly? Yeah. Okay. It's PowerPoint or?
It's PowerPoint.
Okay. So it's here.
Yeah.
The floor is okay. Floor is yours.
So, hi everyone. I'm Chung. I come from Vietnam, and now I'm working. I'm doing my postdoc in Navarra Biomed in Pamplona, it's the north of Spain. So, my present today is talking about the involvement of translin-like proteins in the non-canonical RNA silencing in a fungus, Mucorsis lusitanicus. This fungus is a causal agent that infect to the human, and it causing the mucormycosis, a name of fungus fungal infection in humans. And even it's very rare because it only infects immunocompromised patients. But after COVID-19 pandemic, it increased quite a lot, especially in India. So in this research, we trying to finding the involvement of this protein in the non-canonical RNA silencing. But a little bit introduction about RNA silencing in mucor. In this fungus, we found a different RNA silencing mechanisms in this fungus, including two kinds of silencing. One of them is dicer-independent RNA silencing, and the second one is a dicer-independent RNA silencing. And both of them play main roles in the post-transcriptional gene silencing expressions in this fungus. And you can see this, the non-canonical RNA silencing is not require any dicer to digest the double-stranded RNA silencing, double-stranded RNA molecules. But in the canonical silencing, is need involvement of dicer proteins. So in this study, we identify the function of C3POs. This complex, including translin and TRUX proteins, two kind of protein to form this complex. And this work, we report involvement of translin in these silencing mechanisms. So to do that, we often need to make a mutants to delete the gene, to target genes. Here we already successful to delete the translin like in this genome. And after get mutants, to delete mutants, and we transform the wild type strand and the mutant strand with different plasmid, and you can see that the ratio of silencing is very high. So it confirms that this protein don't play any any roles in the canonical silencing pathway. However, when we compare the accumulation of mRNAs between the different strands like wild type, the dicer mutants, RDRP1, RDRP2, R3B2 and xanthine mutants. I can see that in some cases, in some genes, it increase the accumulation of mRNAs compared to the wild type and also the dicer. So this suggestion that this protein, xanthine protein, could play a role in the non-canonical gene silencing mechanisms. So this is only, I don't know, you need not time to show in the idea. So thank you for the Marie Curie and Mazon Foster grant from Vietnam. Thank you very much.
So now, if I'm not mistaken, we will have some remote presenting. And from my list here, it's Dave the Barber. I don't know if David, it's online. Where is? Yeah, he's already there. Hello. Okay, so David, we are not here yet. Let's see. No. Oh. Está mudo. It's mute your microphone. No. Your microphone in Zoom, it's mute. You can open it. Yeah, try again. No. Yeah, it's open, but we cannot hear it. Try to, yeah. Just a minute. Yeah, technical issues. Always happens, technology. We are trying to say, okay, let's see. Can you increase the volume if it's not?
Testing.
Try again.
Hello?
Yeah, now you're hearing you. Okay.
Ah, okay, great.
Great. So,
do I need to share my slides from this side, or they're displayed already?
Yeah, you can share from your place.
Ah, okay.
Okay. Perfect. Let's see. Okay, it's appearing now. Now the floor is yours.
Yeah, you can see the slides?
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dave Barber, coming from Frankfurt in Germany today, and it's a pleasure to be here to tell you about our work at Crop Science on synthetic analogues of the natural product cornexistine. So natural products are often desirable lead structures in the life sciences owing to their complex chemical architectures, unique modes of action, and low environmental impact. The natural product cornexistine is no exception to that. Isolated from a fungus in 1991, it bears a complex, heavily functionalized 9-membered ring. Sorry about that. Fused with a 5-membered ring anhydride, which opens in the presence of water to form a diacid structure. Because of its complex structure and also its the unique target and low mammalian toxicity, we wanted to further investigate cornexistine as a platform for the development of new crop protection agents. But for this, natural products offer a drawback because of their complex structure, which gives so many of the beneficial properties. They're also incredibly difficult to access via synthetic methods. So therefore, we often try to simplify the structure before we let them go further in our development pipeline. So starting from this, we prepared a sample of cornexistine and then obtained the X-ray co-crystal structure with its target transketolase. In the diagram on the right, you can see that there's many hydrogen bonding interactions between the two acids from diacid structure 2 to arginine and histidine residues of one monomer of transketolase, and then the compound cornexistine bridges to another monomer through glycine residues and the hydroxy group at the C8 carbon. And because of these interactions, we decided to investigate the systematic removal of the functional groups on the right-hand side of the 9-membered ring, namely the ketone, the hydroxy group, and the N-propyl side chain. Using a convergent synthetic route, which in the interest of time I will not go through in detail, but starting from this aldehyde, we were able to access differently substituted nitrile compounds shown here with different R1 and R2 groups depending on our synthetic analogues. Following further modifications, such as changing the hydroxy group to a bromide, giving this bromonitrile, which is then poised to be cyclized to form the 9-membered ring, and then further manipulations such as palladium cross-coupling carbonylation reaction, hydrolysis of the nitrile, and then cyclization deprotection gave us a range of simplified analogues. With the 3 analogues in hand, we tested them in greenhouse trials against a number of important weed species for the crops corn, soy, and wheat. Firstly, we were able to confirm the high and broad herbicidal efficacy of the natural product cornexistine at a dose of 1 kilo per hectare and also 320 grams. Pleasingly for us, the simplified analog 3, missing the ketone in the C1 carbon position, retained a decent level of herbicidal efficacy compared to that of cornexistine, as shown here, and then at 320 grams. Unfortunately, the simplified analogs 4 and 5 had a significant reduction in herbicidal efficacy, with 5 then bearing no substituents on the right-hand side, being almost inactive at the lowest dose. Although a lot of this research from these compounds maybe would prove to be not commercially viable, we hope that this research will inspire other research groups as well as ourselves to investigate the other synthetic positions or other functional groups that could be modified on the structure of cornexistine in the hope that we would be able to bring a sustainable crop protection agent for the future. And with that, I'll bring my talk to an end and thank all of the people that contributed to this research program, and thanks for your attention.
Thanks, Dave. We'll have the questions at the end, so all the questions together, okay. And then we'll invite Helmut Schellenberger for presenting his work. Online also.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. I think the other colleague has to close his presentation.
If you could close your...
Yeah, I'm trying to do it. I can't open Zoom again. Hang on, here we go. Done. Thank you. So I'm sharing my presentation. So can you see my first slide? Hello?
Okay, now it's presenting. You can start.
Okay, thank you. My name is Helmut Schellenberger. I currently work at the Federal Office for Radiation Protection in Germany, and I would like to present to you some research I did until recently in my former job at the Helmholtz-Zentrum München, and I will talk about dose responses for mortality from cerebrovascular and heart diseases in the atomic bomb survivors. It is well known that ionizing radiation can cause cancer. And in the past 20 years, scientific evidence showed that radiation exposure at high and medium doses can also cause non-cancer diseases, such as cardiovascular diseases. And at low doses, the effects are less clear. And in that context, the shape of the dose response is a hot topic. Does the risk increase according to the linear no threshold model, or is there a dose threshold? We investigated this question with the lifespan study data of the atomic bomb survivors. A previous analysis by Dr. Shimizu showed a significant dose response using the linear no threshold model. The data comprise about 87,000 atomic bomb survivors and a large number of several thousand deaths from cerebrovascular diseases that includes brain stroke and several thousand numbers of deaths from heart diseases. And the data have a rather long follow-up time. In addition to the linear no threshold model, we fitted a larger number of empirical nonlinear models that you can see here on the right-hand side. They include various step models, supralinear models, but also sublinear models. In a careful selection process that involves the statistical technique of multimodal inference, we calculated from the surviving dose response models a weighted average. Models that fit the data better are assigned a larger weight, and thereby the shape of the dose response, of the MMI-derived dose response, is more reliably determined than the shape for any of the individual dose responses. And here you can see the results for cerebrovascular diseases. I plotted the excess relative risk versus the dose in gray. The baseline risk without any radiation effect is located here at 0. The red curve is our main result. That is the weighted average from the multimodal inference. And the black curve here, the black line, is the dose response from the linear no threshold model. You can see that at medium and high doses, there's a risk for cerebrovascular disease mortality because the 95% confidence interval for the red curve does no more include 0 at these medium and higher doses. At low doses, we observe a sublinear behavior. The risk is located below the LNT risk prediction, and we have an indication for a dose threshold. At higher doses, the LNT model underestimates the risk compared to the multimodal inference. And here I show you the results for heart diseases. The red curve from the multimodal inference is a superposition from a larger number of linear and nonlinear models because heart diseases comprise a larger number of aggregated diseases. We observe sublinearity over the whole dose range. Yes?
10 seconds for finishing.
Yeah, thank you. We observe nonlinearity over the whole dose range. And our findings have important implications for risk assessment of ionizing radiation in the context of medical applications such as CT scans and radiotherapy, nuclear energy production, and accident-related long-term risk. Our study was published in Radiation and Environmental Biophysics, and with this, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Helmut. We'll move on for the next speaker, and the questions will be at the end, okay? Now we'll call Marco Anteghini for his presentation. Is Marco online in the Zoom presentation? No. If it's Marco not present, we'll move for the next one. Sausha Mai.
Hello.
Oh, Marco? Or Shaoshan?
Shaoshan.
Shaoshan. Sorry. If I mispronounce it, please forgive me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. Everybody will see like this one. But yeah.
Okay, so you can share your presentation or you?
Because my presentation have a big file, so I prefer to use my recording. Okay, so you can.
Yeah. Okay, I will open the recording.
Thank you.
Can we share here the screen? ¿Podemos compartir la pantalla? Aquí, el vídeo. Okay. Sí, el son. Okay. Pero el sonido, la presentación. la grabación. Es un video, sí.
My name is Shaoshan Mai. Our project is
Agora.
of nanoparticle drugs in crosstalk between platelets and the pancreatic cancer.
Okay.
Pancreatic cancer is the fourth most cause of cancer death in Europe. It has the lowest rate of survival among all cancers. We usually heard about the king of cancer. According to World Health Organization from 2020 to 2040, there will be increased 61.7% new cases and 28.5% new deaths. Platelets are one of the most important small cells in our blood. Recently, some research evidence there are some crosstalk between platelets and cancers. In our project, we used two kinds of nanoparticle drugs which connect with several kinds of metal nanoparticles. We use patient-derived organelles as model, which means we take surgical pancreatic cancer patients' tissue to do 3D cell culture. Organelles have a similar morphology, gene, and protein expression with tissues. We test our nanoparticle drugs in cell line and organelles by viability assay like the CCK8 cell titer glue and the flow cytometry. Obviously, our nanoparticle drugs can inhibit cancer cells growing and induce apoptosis. However, for normal cells, they are more resistant. We know platelets have some relations with cancer, so let's see here platelets how to tender with pancreatic cancer organelles. The red is platelets and the green is organelles. We can see platelets go inside organelles and help aid migration. Compared with traditional drug gemcitabine, nanoparticle drug can inhibit platelets aggregation, co-culture organelles with platelets. We see their location and protein expression, and check TCIPA by aggregometer to determine nanoparticle drug inhibition. In a sum, 3D culture organelles are a good model for drug screening. Our two nanoparticle drugs can inhibit pancreatic cancer growth, induce apoptosis, and reduce migration by inhibiting TCIPA. They improve stability, selectivity, which is a potential treatment for pancreatic cancer. If you want to know more about their information, we can discuss later online. Thank you.
Okay,
Okay, thank
so
you.
thanks for the presentation. So I don't know if it's Marco, it's online or not. Then we can move to questions. If there is any questions in the room, I have some. I have a few ones. First, it's about the work of David. I would like to know if it's considered because of the complexity of the molecule, you are working with reducing the complexity, but for synthetic production, yeah. But have you considered heterologous expression of the molecule using some host or something?
Yeah, so BASF had a research program on this in I think 2010s, and they were able to access corn ecstasy, and I think I heard rumors of several hundred grams of it through a biotransformation method. But we tried this based on their patterns, but we couldn't do it. So it's obviously very challenging, and they have some special expertise for it, but they haven't gone further with it. And yeah, you can do this for certain molecules, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So you can try, but
yeah,
not always guaranteed to succeed.
Yeah, it has to be economically attractive. Yeah, but it's just usually a lot of molecules are work out that way. Yeah, for the heterologous expression. That's why I'm wondering. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks for the question.
About Pablo, I would like to ask about the antibiotic evolution with agrochemicals, for example. this is personal because I was doing a lecture in evolution last year, and we found some papers that are relating the antibiotic resistance evolution cross-linked with, for example, agrochemicals that are used for herbicides or other. So have you seen something related to that kind of antibiotic resistance that you're talking about?
Thanks for the question, Leonardo. So the thing with antibiotic resistance is that so you need to use this antibiotic for in farms, for example, to prevent the animals to get sick. Okay, that's like a prophylactic way to use it. But the problem is, in general, farmers use a lot, and this is just a way of select bacteria can avoid the action of the antibiotic. So sometimes you have this link between the abuse of the use of the antibiotic combined with the use of some other products that in general are used in farm, but they are not due to this agrochemical, are due to the abuse of or maluse of the antibiotic.
Yeah, no, but the point is that some papers that related some agrochemicals for example, herbicides or anti-insect agrochemicals, they would have a cross-link that would, I wouldn't say enhance the evolution of antibiotic resistance in some cases, you know. So it's not that the bacteria were resistant antibiotic, but the bad users of agrochemicals were helping the bacteria to evolve antibiotic resistance.
Yeah, sorry. Now I understand your point. Yeah, that's an issue because there is a common chemical structure that can be shared between the agrochemical and the antibiotic. So if in the farm, for example, people use a lot of this kind of products, bacteria can learn how to inactivate those products, and at the end they learn how to do it afterwards if you give an antibiotic.
Yeah. And that's something that has with the work of David, because usually the agrochemicals have complex structure that also are sometimes similar to antibiotic structure. So that's a thin line that we have there. Yeah, David?
Yeah, I mean, it's known in the industry that some modes of action of herbicides are shared with bacteria. Plants and bacteria are very similar in that respect. So certain compounds will for sure increase the selective pressure for resistance development on bacteria, yeah.
That's something, for example, in Brazil, it's a real issue because people use high dosage of agrochemicals in agriculture. And some of them are not allowed in Europe, but are allowed in Latin America. That's some ethical issues there because they're not allowed here, but they are sold in other places like Asia and Africa and Latin America, and people really abuse the use of them. So I think there's a very complex discussion with agrochemicals and antibiotics here. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully, with digitalization, this will be improved, and we can track farmers' use of it more.
Let's hope
and
so.
Also, the EU is a trendsetter in the regulation of this, and hopefully other countries will follow what the EU are doing.
Yeah, we hope so. I think we have one quick last question about Daniel work. Why do you think metalloproteins? Because we are talking about the organization of the tissues. It was not clear to me why metalloproteins. What is their role in the tissue? Do you have?
Yeah, sorry, maybe I wasn't so clear with the 3 minutes about that. So these are just enzymes that we use artificially to degrade the extracellular matrix. So it was a way to degrade the matrix and then prevent the interaction between the two tissues. And they happen to be metalloproteases. But
I thought that maybe it was something with the gene activation or some signal with metalloproteins that was specific.
Yeah, no, it's just a tool that we use to destroy the matrix. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. And with this, I would like to thank all the participants in the lightning talks. And we'll have now the coffee break, yeah, as I'm not mistaken. And I will invite everybody to the front so we can take a picture. Yeah, okay, all the presenters. Thank you very much. And the Zoom is still online. People on Zoom, can you put on the screen? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Put Pep.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the conference.